And we're back. Oh, my dog just tripped. You okay, buddy? Today we're going to be talking about Godzilla Raids Again. I know these are Godzilla 1954 figures, but surprisingly, Raids Again figures are kind of hard to find. Hi, Jack. Hello. Hello. You're part of the video now. You know that. Sorry, that makes me like lose my entire train of thought. I also have a little piece of paper here with names written on it. That the light that I used to film is just making it bleed through. But talking about Godzilla Raids Again, which came out in 1955, the direct sequel to Godzilla 1954, directed by Motoyoshi Oda. This one's an interesting film because I feel like it's a couple steps forward for the Godzilla franchise while also taking like a couple steps backwards. My opinion on this recent rewatch, my opinion has changed a little bit. So I obviously have this Godzilla the Showa era films here, which has every single Showa era film, which I believe is like 13 or 14 films, maybe even 15. I can't quite remember off the top of my head right now. But I remember originally watching all of these, and I don't know, the second one just kind of like felt off to me. I was like, the monster fights are a little weird. Hey, Jack. Hello. Hello. How's it going? Can you go lay down? Can you go lay down? Go relax. Because like the weight isn't really like, I guess we'll get there. But Eiji Tsuburaya came back to do the special effects for this, and for this film, he was actually given the very first Japanese special film effects artist, I guess I should say. He was given the title of director of special effects for this movie and subsequent movies in the future that I'll probably end up talking about at some point. But he was the very first Japanese person to be given that title, and it's like very prominently in the opening credits of this film, just like director of special effects Eiji Tsuburaya. Which I will say that I really do like the effects of this film. Overall, I think they're good. There's a couple that are hit and miss, but I think the good ones really make up for the like kind of lackluster ones. As we kind of like go through the movie, I'll talk about it a little bit more. I'm just kind of getting my general thoughts. I can see why people say that this is like an underrated Godzilla film. Because it's a weird time in Godzilla's like filmography, because you have Godzilla 1954, which is like the super popular movie in the 50s. It gets sold off to America. It gets re-edited and redubbed as Godzilla King of the Monsters. It does so well financially for Toho that they decide to make a sequel the next year, Godzilla Raids Again. And then between Godzilla Raids Again and King Kong vs. Godzilla, the third movie in the franchise, it was a 7-year gap. For some reason, they just shelved Godzilla. I don't know if this just did, like, I don't know too much research into this film. I don't know if this just did poorly. I have a book. I kind of wish I had it near me. I have a book called Godzilla the First 70 Years. And in that, it talks about how they did sell this film to American redistributors to the point where they even built new suits. There's a brand new Godzilla suit, and there's a brand new Anguirus suit, which Anguirus is a brand new monster introduced into this movie, and that's kind of where we get the very first monster fight in the series. They made it, sent it off to America, and then that fell through. The company that was supposed to make the American version of that and film new stuff for it, I think went under, or like the production just like went under, and those suits are just gone. Like nobody knows where those suits are. So like that's such an interesting thing to me. I think it eventually came out as like Gargantuan the Fire Beast in America. I haven't seen the American like dub or re-edit or anything. The only really ones I've seen is King of the Monsters, which is the re-edit of 1954. And so that kind of like King of the Monsters is a like legitimately good re-edit in my opinion. I think it's Raymond Burr stars in it, and he's actually pretty good. He's integrated seamlessly into that film. But I think if you go back and watch the original, a lot of the Japanese characters are very underdeveloped in that version of the film. And there's kind of an interesting love triangle. Well, I don't know. I think it's kind of boring, but there's a love triangle thing going on that's way more developed in the original Japanese version of it. And I think Dr. Serizawa is just a little bit more of a sympathetic and tortured character. I think he like kind of steals the entire show. But I digress. I guess where I want to go with this film is, where do I want to go with this film? I guess we'll just start off at the very beginning. We follow two characters, Suichi Tsukioka and Koji Kobayashi. I have to hold it down awkwardly like this. I don't even know if that comes across on the camera, because if I hold it up like this, I have a Japanese quiz on the back of this that I did all right on. And then my ring light just like bleeds it through. I'll keep that in mind for the future. And we have Koji Kobayashi, played by Minoru Chiaki. Minoru Chiaki. And so they're these pilots for a fishing company. They just collect fish, and I believe they're looking for prawn. And Kobayashi's plane starts having engine problems, so he has to essentially emergency land on this like little island off the coast of Japan. This takes place in Osaka. And so Tsukioka goes and essentially rescues him. And this is where we first get our look at Godzilla and Anguirus in this film. It's kind of a cool shot. They're like on this cave, and they're on this island, kind of like waiting and just kind of getting their bearings and everything. And they hear this noise, and it's kind of like through, I guess like the closest thing I could say is like maybe a ravine. You kind of like poke through a ravine, and you kind of see like Godzilla like poke his head out and like pull it back. It kind of reminds me of, I'm curious if it was a puppet or not, because in Godzilla 1954, there was sequences where Godzilla is a hand puppet. I think the profile picture I currently use for YouTube has that. I think that is the hand puppet used. And so the way that it moves, I kind of want to say it's a puppet, but the monsters move very fast in this. And from what I was reading, there was a cameraman that messed up filming. They referenced specifically the Osaka fight at Osaka Castle. But I think that also bleeds over into the fight that we see on this little island. It's a very short fight, but the monsters like don't have really any weight to them. I think that's like my main criticism of this, is they didn't really figure out the weight of the monsters. They're like weirdly fast for like what size they should be, and in my opinion, it kind of like breaks the illusion that they're two monsters fighting, and you kind of go, oh, they're two people in a suit. Which, by the way, Godzilla in this film is played by Haruo Nakajima, and Anguirus is played by Katsumi Tezuka. I always feel bad for the people who have to play four-legged monsters in these films. There's a Gamera movie that they nail the suit of a four-legged monster of, and it looks seamless. But with like Anguirus, it's always like, oh, this is a guy on his hands and knees just kind of like crawling around. And for some reason, it just like never looks great. Like the suit itself looks pretty good. Godzilla has such a distinct, and I kind of wish I had a figure of him somewhere, but those figures are like really expensive. Godzilla has such a unique look in this film that it just like is not replicated at any given time throughout the rest of the series. You could maybe say he like the King Kong versus Godzilla is like a little similar, but I don't know. It's just such like a weird, distinct look. And I think it comes from, because Godzilla dies at the end of 1954 from the oxygen destroyer. And we learned that the Godzilla in this film is a completely different Godzilla. It just happens to be like the last of the race. And so that kind of implies that the Godzilla that shows up through the rest of the Showa era is a different Godzilla than 1954. And they do some kind of fun stuff with that in the Millennium era stuff. Like Kiryu, the Mechagodzilla from that era, is made from the bones of like 1954 Godzilla, and the same with like GMK, Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All Out Attack. I think it's the longest title in the series. that Godzilla is like said to be like the vengeful soul of 1954 Godzilla. So they do some like fun stuff with that, but it's like I guess implied that every Godzilla within that continuity, within the Showa era continuity, is the second Godzilla. And then obviously later on we get Son of Godzilla, but we're not going to worry about Manila right now because Manila in the Showa era is kind of a fucking like an actual nightmare. Maybe I'll talk about those movies one of these days. I could talk about Godzilla for a very, very long time, so I'm sure I'll get there eventually. So yeah, they kind of duke it out on this island, and the two pilots leave, and we meet up with Dr. Yamane, played by it's a Shimizu. Oh no, I'm forgetting his name right now off the top of my head. He's in a lot of Akira Kurosawa stuff. His last name's Shimizu. I want to say it's there's a part. Is it Takeshi Shimizu? No, I don't think that's right. Apologies. I should have wrote down his name, but I thought I was going to be able to remember it off the top of my head. Unfortunate. But sorry, before I get too far away, Haru Nakajima, also like who played Godzilla in 1954. The reason the suit probably looks so different is because it's a lighter material. It was made of a lighter material because there was like just a lot more action that was needed in this film compared to the last one. Because as far as I understood, it was like the 1954 suit is like so heavy and so hot. I think like Haru Nakajima almost drowned during like a water tank scene because of like how like overheated he got. He like passed out and almost drowned in the suit. So this one's like way more lightweight, and you can kind of just tell that it's just like a lighter material overall. But they go to meet Dr. Yamane from the first one. He's like, this is the only scene he's in. He doesn't show up for very long. But he essentially says, hey, we have no countermeasures against Godzilla. We killed the other one with the oxygen destroyer, but the person who made the oxygen destroyer, Dr. Serizawa, is dead because he sacrifices himself at the end of the first movie. And he's like, I'm going to show you some footage to kind of show what we dealt with Godzilla, presumably the year before. I don't know what year this is supposed to take place. There's really no like establishing things, so I'm just going to assume it takes place a year later. So they show clips from Godzilla 1954. This is kind of an interesting point in what would happen in the future of Godzilla, because later Godzilla films, because like the Japanese film industry was just kind of didn't have a whole lot of money. A lot of the money was being like diverted from film to television at the time. This is like, we're getting into the 60s kind of stuff here, but a way around the budgetary restraints that they would use is reuse footage from older films or reuse special effects shots. And this is our first time we ever see footage being reused. And it's so interesting to me to see it at this point in time in the Godzilla franchise, because it's something that will become rampant and used to lesser effect later on. Like I rewatched Godzilla vs. Gigan not too long ago. That has a lot of reused footage, but it's like new footage, but they just like kind of loop it over and over again. I don't know. As much as I love the design of Gigan, not a good movie. Not a very good movie. I turned it off. I was like, okay, I think I got but Eiji Tsuburaya had passed away at that point, and that's like a whole other topic that maybe if I review that movie one of these days, I'll kind of get into a little bit more. But where was I? But this is kind of like a way to reuse footage in a way that's like informative and helps progress the story. Hey, people who didn't deal with Godzilla, here's what happened with Godzilla. Here's what we did to try to stop him. Here's all the stuff that didn't work. And then it also informs the people who maybe didn't see Godzilla 1954 of like a sort of small little recap. Like, this is why Godzilla is scary. It's a very short scene. It doesn't really last all that long, maybe a minute at most. And so I just kind of find it interesting that that's used at this point in time. So but he goes, hey, he's kind of sensitive to light, which I don't remember. I don't think that's a thing in 1954. I think that's a thing like designed specifically for this movie. So he goes, hey, he's sensitive to light. So that's like really the only thing I can tell you. He's like, we got nothing else. And so he leaves the movie, and the I forget where Shichoku, she I don't quite remember where he's going, but they start tracking Godzilla, and he's not going to land at Osaka. He's going to land somewhere else. And so there's also another character, uh, Yomaji, played by Setsuko Wakayama. She is the daughter of the person who runs the fish, like the fishing company, essentially. Um, and she is in love with uh, um, Tsukioka. Also, I should say Hiyoshi Koizumi would be he's kind of like a mainstay in these Godzilla films. He plays a doctor. I can't remember his character's name, but he plays a doctor in Mothra and would like show up in subsequent Godzilla films, especially like I don't think he shows up in King Kong versus Godzilla, but if he shows up like in Mothra versus Godzilla, I think he shows up in Ghidorah, three-headed monster, and he shows up in Invasion of the Astro Monster, and I'm sure some others. But he plays a pretty big role in Mothra, so he's like a pretty big mainstay in these like future Godzilla films. But you learn that they have a relationship, so they go dancing at a club that to me is very reminiscent of Ikaru. I don't know why. I don't know if it's because Dr. Yamane's actor plays the main character in Ikaru, which is like one of my favorite films. In a film that like I want it to be the last film I watch before I die. So maybe I'll talk about that one of these days. But a Kurosawa film, highly recommend it. But I digress. While they're at this dance club, a thing comes on and says, "Hey, Godzilla is rediverting his path to Osaka Bay," and so everyone kind of panics and runs out. And then the military's there, ready to fight Godzilla, but they deploy flares. Godzilla gets distracted, turns around, starts walking away, and they go, "Cool, we did it, woohoo!" And so the flares work, and the only thing that really happens is like when Godzilla's turning around to go back, he like his tail swipes into a lighthouse. So it's the only destruction so far. Then we get to a point where we cut to a bunch of criminals in the back of a van. They're getting transported, and they essentially do this. I could break it down bit by bit, but I kind of don't feel like it does serve the greater plot of the film. They essentially escape, and it leads to a car chase that causes the criminals to crash into a tanker. It's like a little car miniature that crashes into this tanker and causes this huge explosion. And the flames of this explosion are brighter than the flare, so Godzilla goes, "Oh, what's that?" And then at the same time, Anguirus happens to land in Osaka as well, and we get like one of the cooler monster fights. Actually, the second and last monster fight of this movie. I shouldn't say the series. There's plenty of monster fights in the series where they're battling through Osaka and they're tearing everything down. And the coolest bit is at Osaka Castle, which is like a really big historical landmark there. Obviously, they didn't go anywhere near the real Osaka Castle, maybe for filming, but like they're fighting, and like the waves of the blows that they're like hitting on each other like starts cracking the walls of Osaka Castle, and then like Godzilla like shoves Anguirus through Osaka Castle and like defeats him. And that's like halfway through the movie, and we're done with our other monster. I kind of wish it was like peppered a little bit more throughout. There's an interesting thing that happens with these Godzilla films where it's like, this is very front loaded with monster fight, and then the back half is like, okay, how do we deal with Godzilla? Even though Godzilla just kind of goes away. There's like really he doesn't come back. The only really time there's like destruction is that Osaka fight, and then he kind of leaves. As opposed to 54, I feel like it's a little bit more, how to say, like, paced out. I feel like he comes, he attacks, he goes back, he comes back later, attacks, and they're like, okay, we got to deal with this. I don't remember him ever really coming back to Osaka. They just eventually find him on an island up near Hokkaido, because after this, there's kind of like a heartwarming scene. After all this destruction's done, all these characters sort of get together, and, it's like, the boss of the fishing company is like, hey, well, it's fine. We'll rebuild. We'll move forward. And I don't know if it's just like a kind of sentiment that's carried over from post World War II Japan at the time, where the same writers that wrote Godzilla 1954 wrote this as well, with the exception of Ishiro Honda, the director of the first one. He didn't return for this. He was working on other things, I believe, at the time, which is, I thought Ishiro, for the longest time, I thought Ishiro Honda worked on this film, but that wasn't the case. And so the screenwriter, the person who did the original story and the screenwriter from the last one did the screenplay for this. But it's kind of like a heartwarming scene of like, it's okay, we'll rebuild. And people are like kind of coming together and like try to like be as happy as they can and like move forward past this destruction because they know that like they'll persevere. And it's kind of like a nice heartwarming scene. There's like a lot of jokes back and forth because Kobayashi's asked to go to Hokkaido to help out there because there's really nothing he can do in Osaka because everything's destroyed. And so they all kind of go to Hokkaido, and there's some like really cool, there's some interesting snow effects happening up in Hokkaido, which is like the northernmost region of Japan, I believe. It's just, it gets cold, it snows there. And so there's like a little bit of a lull in the story where Kobayashi's like, I'm going to find a wife. And they all like go out drinking together. And then eventually, I guess they retrack down Godzilla. So they get in their planes and they go try to find Godzilla. They find him on this like little remote like island that's just absolutely covered in snow, which leads like to one of the cooler sets I think in the series, where they're like going around and eventually they have fighter pilots. For some reason it's kind of muddled in my brain the exact like series of events, but that's not too important. Go watch this movie if you're interested. At this point we're like halfway through the movie. Go watch the film if this sounds interesting. It's pretty readily available, thankfully. I think it's on HBO Max. It's definitely on the Criterion channel, so it probably is on HBO Max as well. So they go off, and there's some fighter pilots that kind of join with them, and Kobayashi, his plane gets messed up, and he crashes into a mountain, and unfortunately dies, but he triggers an avalanche, and snow starts falling on Godzilla, so they get this plan of, oh, hey, let's trigger an avalanche to bury Godzilla. And so they go back and regroup, and they're like, this is the plan, let's go. And so that honestly leads to like one of the cooler set pieces of, honestly, like, it's a really impressive set because you have to remember it's a guy in a suit, so it's like a full guy, and they have to cover him in like fake ice. And so there's just like this really huge, I've seen behind the scenes pictures, it's really impressive. I have a book back here on the bookshelf that's like just all pictures of behind the scenes stuff of like all the Godzilla films essentially. And so there's like all this like ice starting to cover Godzilla, and they eventually like encase him in an avalanche, and that's how he's defeated for this film. And I believe that's why I believe he bust out of that in King Kong versus Godzilla. I can't remember 100%. But I guess to talk about my overall feelings of the movie, I remember liking it. I liked it way more this time around than the last. I've said that before. But at the same time, like, I don't know if I like it as much as 54. It's really hard to beat that movie. I think it's like 54 is such a good movie for it's almost like a near perfect movie for the first time a movie like that was ever made. And so there's like some scenes where it's like the planes are flying and it's like, okay, that's, you can tell it's like a little miniature plane on a string. And there's some like, especially towards the very end, they're looking down at Godzilla and you can tell it's this like little static figure that doesn't move. And so I think there's a lot of stuff like that that's like, it kind of takes me out of it. I think same as like the monster fights, like there's just no weight to Godzilla like there is in 54, just because of that cameraman, just because of the cameraman mistake. And according to like Super Eye, he didn't want to like rebuild the sets and refilm it, so they just kept it like that, which makes sense. They probably had a really short time frame to even make this movie. Like Godzilla 1954 was 4 months of production, I believe. I think it was like May to November. It had to be released in November, and they started filming in like May or something like that. So very short production window time for a movie of that caliber is like impressive. The human element of this movie, I think I enjoy a little bit more than 54. But the monster stuff, I think, is a little bit of a step back. Like, Anguirus is like not really in the film all that often. He really only shows up in those 2 fight scenes. He doesn't really get any development, like, besides that. Like, when they go to visit Dr. Yamane and, like, kind of a council, they're like looking through these like dinosaur books and it's like, hey, this is what he is, and that's how you get the name Anguirus. But other than that, it's just like, oh, it's another kind of dinosaur, because in 54 they theorize it's a dinosaur that had a bunch of nuclear radiation. That's how Godzilla was made. So I think it's a step back in those departments, but kind of a step forward as to like being a more solid blueprint for stuff moving forward. It's interesting that Ishiro Honda didn't direct this, because Ishiro Honda has like a documentary background, and I think the love triangle kind of comes from because he wrote part of the screenplay. I think that like love triangle background comes from his like earlier films where he kind of did the same thing. I don't know if he just, I guess he just like loves, I guess he just like loves triangles. I don't know. But I think this is worth like I think this is worth like a revisit if you haven't maybe seen it in a while. I think it's worth the watch 100%, because it's a very underlooked movie that I think does a lot of stuff right. I think it does more stuff right than it does wrong. It's a very entertaining movie from front to back. The score's a little different. I can't remember who did the score. It wasn't Akira Ifukube who did the score for the first one and some subsequent Godzilla films, which is like a whole like that Ifukube score is something I can totally get into. It's like such an iconic score, and like in later Godzilla films, they would just kind of ask him permission to use his old scores and not make any new stuff. And it's like, I guess. But yes, I do recommend Godzilla Raids Again. It's a very underlooked movie in my opinion. It's kind of a easily forgotten sequel, because it feels like a sequel that was, if you know the history of it, it feels like a sequel that's rushed out just to capitalize on the success of the first. So it kind of feels like a little like sequel baity, but you can also tell there's like a lot of heart and soul put into it. It doesn't really feel like a rush job. The only points where it feels like a rush job is like the Godzilla and Anguirus stuff. So I'm definitely higher on this film than I was in my first viewing of it. I'm really glad that I revisited it last night. And it does make me like kind of want to go through some other Godzilla films that I maybe have a lower opinion on, just to see if it like kind of comes up, because I remember marathoning all of these at one point, and especially towards the end, that's kind of what I felt about Godzilla versus Gigan, but I was like, oh no, it's just not a good movie. But I'm curious if some of those like later sequels, I was just kind of hitting Showa era fatigue. I don't know. But yeah, I highly recommend you watch this movie. If you have any movie recommendations for me to review, please leave it in the comments below. I'm totally up to, suggestions. Yeah, you should go watch Godzilla Raids Again. I highly recommend it. Probably said that too many times, but I would really appreciate it if you left a like and left a comment down below. Again, if you want me to review a specific movie, I'm totally all for that. Yeah, I will see you in the next video. This was a little bit prolonged because my apartment has some like water stuff going on, and I was without water for like 8 hours yesterday. I wanted to film this yesterday, but I didn't get the chance to shower before they shut it off, because they shut it off so abruptly. And so my time schedule for recording stuff is a little off. I hopefully plan on getting the Blossom Shanghai episodes 2 through 4 out hopefully by this weekend. I might do another film review before that, because I watched another film last night with my girlfriend that I feel like I really need to talk about, because it's absolutely a baffling film. But yes, I will see you in the next video whenever that is, and I hope you all have a great day. Goodbye.